Welcome to Lesson 7 for Unit B.2. My name is Dan Olandisi, and I'm a science teacher who uses OpenSciEd in my classroom. In Lesson 7, we're asking what is happening to carbon sinks and other ecosystems, and it gives us an opportunity to look at a clear path for how energy and matter move through different systems around the world. Let's start by looking back at how we arrived at this point in the unit. During Lesson 6, we figured out how zombie fires burn under ice and release carbon into the Arctic ecosystem. Now we're expanding our view and wondering what is happening to carbon sinks and other ecosystems around the world, and exactly looking at what factors make them so vulnerable to burning. It helps students to see that the mechanisms they uncovered in the cold north might have parallels in very different climates. Let's take a quick look at how this lesson is structured so you know what to expect over the next couple days. We can see that this is a 2-day investigation lesson. It does not involve a wet lab, but does utilize digital devices for one of the groups. Material preparation is relatively light, takes about 20 minutes to print the case studies and set up the global animation link. The California case study group will specifically need an internet-connected device to view the brief embedded video clip of the campfire. Our lesson is organized into 3 distinct sense-making loops that move students from a macro-level observation down to specific systems and then back out to a more generalized consensus. We start by exploring global wildfires, transition into investigating detailed case studies in small groups, and then finally gather to establish universal conditions that make carbon sinks likely to burn. In the first loop, students are observing an animated global fire map and recording what they notice. They will figure out from this visual data is that the carbon sinks are actively burning all over the world, meaning that this is not just an issue for the Arctic. This naturally leads them to wonder what specific factors are causing fires in these distinct global locations. For our second loop, students are actively engaged in reading case studies about carbon sink fires from across the globe, developing small group models, and sharing those models with peers using a 2-stay, 2-stray format. Through this process, they figure out that a combination of historical events, land use changes, and climate factors make these diverse ecosystems vulnerable to fire. They leave the loop wondering what common patterns might exist across all of these different environments. In the third loop, students are doing a collaborative scientist circle to build a unified consensus list of fire conditions. They figure out that factors like drought, rising temperatures, and fire suppression act as common drivers that shift matter and energy directly from the biosphere to the atmosphere. This prompts them to wonder about the broader global consequences of releasing all this carbon dioxide. By the conclusion of this lesson, students realize that many different ecosystems contain carbon sinks that were originally created through photosynthesis. Second, they see that a mix of climate-related and human-caused factors make the energy and matter in these sinks highly likely to burn. Finally, they establish that fire increases the flow of this matter and energy from the biosphere into the atmosphere. Now I want to walk through some of the specific moments in the lesson where students' thinking shifts and where your facilitation matters the most. In Part 3, students look at the power and historicity graphic framework on the screen to help them guide their thinking. In the classroom, you'll see students leaning in and discussing how human choices from the past affect environments today, sometimes questioning how a legal policy can alter a physical forest. This moment is instructionally significant because it shifts student thinking into social, ecological lens, explicitly bringing human systems into the science. I want to make sure students understand that historical decisions made by people in power have long-term impacts on an ecosystem's fire risk. If they struggle, my move is to help them see humans as internal factors existing alongside the ecosystem, rather than just treating nature as a pool of resources for human consumption. Our case studies cover sensitive, heavy topics like colonization, displacement, and highly devastating fires. I want to ensure students are monitoring their own feelings and practicing deep respect for both the human and non-human parts of those systems. As a facilitator, I make sure not to assume what students are feeling, and I actively provide the independent time and space they need to process those emotions. Moving into Part 4, small groups work together around large paper whiteboards using the prompts on slide M to build a system model. The group should be drawing arrows to track carbon and debating where to place question marks. This step moves students out of passively reading text and forces them to actively synthesize that information into a visual model tracking energy and matter flow. The activity helps them visualize how specific climate factors and human decisions make stored matter and energy vulnerable to burning. I monitor their models to ensure they are explicitly drawing human actions and historical factors. A move I highly recommend is telling students to draw a question mark directly on their model wherever they encounter an interaction or mechanism they cannot fully explain yet. In part 7, the room gets active as we launch the two stay, two stray protocol based on instructions displayed on the slide. Half of each group standing up and move. Oh, that's why that sounds weird. In part 7, the room gets active as we launch the two stay, two stray protocol based on the instructions displayed on the slide. Generally, we'll have half of the group stand up and move to a new table in order to view a different model, while the other half stays put to explain their own ecosystem to the students who visit them. This is instructionally significant because it efficiently cross-pollinates case study findings across the entire room, saving us from having every individual student read all 5 lengthy texts. I watch to see if students are realizing that despite being located in completely different parts of the world, these carbon sinks share striking similarities in how matter flows and why they burn. To support this, I make sure to pass out the peer feedback guidelines and explicitly prompt the straying students to record similarities and differences on their sticky notes to bring back to their home groups. In part 9, the class gathers into a scientist circle, looking at the consensus prompts on the board to build a shared chart. Students are sitting in a large circle with their notebooks open, looking up at the board and calling out similarities across their different case studies. This moment allows the class to abstract broad, generalized science principles out of the 5 separate, siloed stories. I watch to make sure students recognize that drought, rising temperatures, and fire suppression are universal factors increasing fire risk. To help them generalize across these distinct locations, I actively guide them to use the scientific terms biosphere and atmosphere on their charts. I also make sure we only add fire suppression to our personal glossaries after we fully establish this shared understanding during our discussion. At this point, our students are wondering about the larger global consequences of releasing all this trapped carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. I use this to preview Lesson 8, letting them know that we will set up a bottle system investigation to test the direct effect of increased carbon dioxide on temperature. Let's pivot to some practical classroom testing logistics that help these 2 days run smoothly. Looking at the map of our case study locations, I have a few formatting tips for preparation. I found it works best to print out individual copies of the case study so every student can directly mark up and annotate their own text. One thing I like to do in distributing them is to ensure that our whole class covers at least 4 of the 5 available case studies to make our upcoming consensus discussions rich. Also, keep in mind that whichever group gets assigned the California case study will absolutely need an internet connected device to watch the embedded campfire video. When it comes to differentiating the text, Slide L provides a good backdrop for managing student reading choices. What has worked for me is keeping the text complexities in mind. Tonle Sap and Cerrado are the most complex. Great Dismal Swamp and Victoria are intermediate, and California is the most accessible of them. Something that helps engagement is intentionally forming homogeneous groups, mixed ability groups, or opening it up to student choice based purely on their geographical interests. Personally, I do a little bit of both in my classroom. I form one homogeneous group of students I know will need more of my time, one group of students who function really well independently, and the remaining students tend to be in mixed groups that require support, but will likely start with supporting each other. For my emergent multilingual students, I always encourage them to relate these narratives back to their own lived experiences or to use non-linguistic modes and sketches to capture their ideas in their models. For the slides showing a global fire animation map, pacing is everything. I found it's best to play the animated map 2 or 3 times to give students enough time for full visual processing. On the first watch, I asked them to just observe without writing anything down. Then on subsequent watches, I direct them to focus their attention on specific geographic regions and start recording their targeted notices and wonderings. For glossary management, the key terms student needs are to add are fire suppression, biosphere, and atmosphere. It's important to wait and have students add these to their personal glossaries only after the class has co-constructed and shared an operational understanding of the concepts during our whole group discussions. This keeps the focus on sense making rather than rote vocabulary memorization ahead of schedule. We have a lot of moving parts of posters in this lesson. You'll want to resurface our ideas for investigations poster and our shared community agreements to ground our collaborative discussions. We will create a permanent class chart titled What Makes Carbon Sink More Likely to Burn that we will keep for future lessons. And the small group case study models can be kept by individual groups for reference, but do not need to be saved as a permanent classroom fixture. Students now understand that diverse ecosystems across the globe function as carbon sinks that are increasingly vulnerable to burning due to a combination of climate shifts and historical human choices. This builds the perfect foundation for Lesson 8, where we'll model the atmospheric conditions of that released carbon dioxide on global temperatures. Thanks for walking through this lesson with me. You got this.